He has wealth, rules, and a perfect house. She has dignity, deadlines, and a father caught between life and waiting. When one no echoes, an old truth changes everything. How far can a principal go when he learns who truly paid the price? The October sun pressed against the tall windows of Andrew Sullivan's home office in River Oaks, casting sharp lines across the mahogany desk. Outside, the landscaped lawn stretched green and perfect, watered on schedule, trimmed twice weekly. Inside, air conditioning hummed steadily at 68 degrees. Andrew sat reviewing quarterly reports when Claudia knocked. 3 soft taps, then silence. She entered with her hands folded, shoulders straight, carrying a manila folder against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm sorry to interrupt." Her voice was steady, carefully neutral. "I need to speak with you about something urgent." Andrew glanced up briefly, his reading glasses catching the light. "What is it?" Claudia moved to the desk's edge, opening the folder with precise movements. Inside were printed emails from Memorial Hermann Hospital, a surgery estimate, a doctor's letter marked with red deadline stamps. "My father needs heart surgery, a valve replacement. The hospital has a scheduling window that closes in 3 weeks. If we miss it, he goes back on the waiting list for 6 months." She placed each document on the desk, aligning the corners. Her fingertips were calloused from scrubbing, her nails trimmed short. "I'm asking for a salary advance, 3 months. I've worked here 14 months without missing a shift. I'll sign any repayment terms you want." Andrew picked up the hospital letter, scanning the letterhead, the surgeon's credentials, the itemized costs, numbers arranged in neat columns. His jaw tightened slightly. "Claudia, I understand this is difficult." He set the paper down, removing his glasses. "But we have a policy. No salary advances, no exceptions. We implemented it after issues with previous staff, people who took money and disappeared." "I'm not previous staff." Her voice remained level, but something flickered behind her eyes. Not anger, something deeper. "I'm here every day. You know where I live, where my mother lives. I'm asking because there's no other option. I'm sure there are programs, hospital payment plans, community funds." He pushed the documents back across the desk. "I can't make exceptions based on personal circumstances. It's a business principle." Claudia gathered the papers slowly, her hands steady despite the tremor in her throat. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She nodded once, turned, and walked to the door. Before leaving, she paused. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Sullivan." The door closed with a soft click. Andrew returned to his reports, but the numbers blurred slightly. He told himself he'd made the right decision. Policies existed for a reason. Exceptions created precedents. He had a company to protect. Outside, the sprinklers came on, misting the perfect grass. Claudia took the metro rail from River Oaks back to her mother's apartment in the East End, watching Houston roll past the windows, high-rises giving way to neighborhoods with chain-link fences and corner stores advertising ice-cold beer in hand-painted signs. She got off at Navigation Boulevard, walked 3 blocks past the panaderia where she bought pan dulce on Sundays, and climbed the stairs to the second-floor unit. The air smelled like frijoles simmering on the stove. Her mother, Elena, sat at the kitchen table with reading glasses perched on her nose, hand-stitching a hem. The old Singer sewing machine, bought 30 years ago in Monterey, sat quiet in the corner. Elena looked up as Claudia entered, reading her daughter's face before any words were spoken. He said no. Elena set down the fabric. "Yahora?" Claudia pulled out her notebook, the one with water stains on the cover, and opened to a fresh page. She wrote in careful block letters. Options. Underneath, 1. Sell Mama's Singer. 2. Payday loan, 18% interest. 3. Ask Tia Carmen, weekend tamale stand. 4. Fundraiser, church raffle. She didn't cry. Crying used time, and time had a deadline. Elena reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own, skin soft from years of fabric work, joints thick from arthritis. "We'll find a way, mija." Claudia nodded, flipping to the hospital's letter again. The deadline glared in red. October 28th. Final scheduling window. That night, she couldn't sleep. Through the thin walls, she heard her neighbor's TV playing novellas, someone's dog barking 3 streets over, the distant hum of Interstate 10. She thought about her father, Julio, who'd worked 31 years for Sullivan Electrical, who'd taught her to fix broken light switches when she was 8, who'd built the bookshelf in her childhood bedroom from salvaged wood, who'd been fired 2 years ago for poor performance. Nobody explained. The next morning, Claudia called Tia Carmen. Her aunt, who sold tamales every Saturday at the farmer's market, listened without interrupting. When Claudia finished, Carmen said, "I have 800 saved. It's yours." "Tia, no. Your father helped me when my Luis died. This is family." Claudia wrote it down. $800. The surgery cost $22,000. She went to Mass that Sunday, sitting in the back pew of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and watched Father Miguel announce the church raffle. She approached him after, explained quietly. He agreed to dedicate next month's proceeds to her father's surgery fund. She didn't tell anyone at the Sullivan house. She showed up Monday morning, cleaned the kitchen, changed the guest room linens, watered the orchids in the sunroom. She moved through the house, like always, invisible, efficient, necessary. Andrew passed her in the hallway once. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded. She nodded back. Neither spoke. The audit. Request came through email on a Thursday. Routine compliance review for the year-end financial statements. Andrew's CFO, Mark Benson, forwarded it with a note. External auditor wants access to HR files, termination records from last 36 months. Standard procedure. Andrew signed off without thinking much about it. Audits were part of business, boxes to check, papers to organize. He expected nothing unusual. But 2 weeks later, the compliance manager, Janet Torres, knocked on his office door with a file folder and an uncertain expression. "Mr. Sullivan, the auditor flagged something. May I?" She entered, placing the folder on his desk. Inside was a termination document dated October 2022, signed by Mark Benson. Name, Julio Ramirez. Position, Senior Maintenance Technician. Reason for termination, consistent underperformance, failure to meet evolving technical standards. Andrew frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. What's the issue? The auditor requested interviews with former supervisors to verify cause. 2 long-term foremen said Ramirez wasn't a performance problem. In fact, Janet pulled out a second sheet. Photocopied commendations from 2010, 2014, 2018. He received multiple recognitions during the company's expansion. Worked here 31 years, starting when it was still your father's electrical workshop. Andrew studied the commendations. The handwriting on one, his father's, read, Julio Ramirez for exceptional innovation in panel design, bonus awarded. Something cold settled in his chest. Why would Mark terminate someone with this record? The file doesn't say. Just vague language about evolving standards. No performance reviews, no warning documentation. The auditor thinks it's irregular. Andrew leaned back, pressing his fingers against his temples. He thought about policies, about no exceptions, about protecting the company. Schedule interviews with those foremen. I want full statements. Already done. They're in the file. He read them. Both men, Hector Dominguez and Sam Park, veterans with 20-plus years each, said the same thing. Julio was reliable, skilled, creative. One detail caught Andrew's attention. Dominguez mentioned Julio had designed the prototype for the A-Falcon control panel, the modular system that reduced hospital maintenance costs and opened the contracts that made Sullivan Holdings profitable. Andrew opened his laptop, searching the company's patent database. There it was. U.S. Patent Number 9, 475552, Falcon Modular Control System, filed 2012. Inventor listed, Sullivan Holdings, LLC. No co-author, no Julio Ramirez. His stomach turned. He called Mark into his office that afternoon. Mark arrived in his usual crisp suit, confident smile. "What's up? Tell me about Julio Ramirez." The smile faltered slightly. "Old termination." "Why?" The auditor flagged it. 31 years, multiple commendations, then fired for poor performance. "Explain." Mark's expression shifted, subtle, calculating. Ramirez couldn't adapt. Technology changed. Standards rose. He was a good guy, but he couldn't keep up. I made a business decision. "Did you document his poor performance?" "Verbal warnings. Nothing written?" "It was handled appropriately." Andrew's jaw tightened. Was he involved in designing the Falcon panel? Mark hesitated. He contributed. But the company owns all employee innovations. That's standard. With credit? Credit doesn't matter. What matters is protecting intellectual property. Andrew stood, anger simmering beneath his carefully controlled voice. "Get out." After Mark left, Andrew sat alone in his office as evening light bled through the windows. He thought about exceptions, about policies, about the name Ramirez. Then he remembered. Claudia's last name was Ramirez. He pulled up her employment file. Emergency contact. Julio Ramirez, father. The cold in his chest turned to ice. Andrew didn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed under Egyptian cotton sheets, staring at the ceiling fan's slow rotation, thinking about the man he'd refused to help and the man his company had erased. At dawn, he drove to the old warehouse in the 5th Ward where his father had stored records from the early years. Boxes of ledgers, blueprints, receipts from before everything went digital. The building smelled like dust and motor oil, decades of work compressed into cardboard and paper. He found his father's handwriting on a box labeled 19-9-0-2005. Opened it and began searching. 3 hours later, surrounded by yellow documents, he found it. Graph paper marked Sullivan Electrical Works, dated March 1998. Signed in the corner. J. Ramirez. The sketches showed early relay sequences for a modular panel system. Crude but clear, the foundation of what would become the Falcon. Beneath the sketches were handwritten receipts. Cash bonus, 200. Technician Ramirez, improvement ideas. His father's signature. Another receipt, 350. Prototype materials, approved, J. Ramirez. Andrew sat back on his heels, the papers trembling slightly in his hands. His father had compensated Julio in cash, off the books, for ideas that became patents filed solely under the company name. It wasn't theft, not legally, but it lived in a gray space where business ambition turned a worker's creativity into corporate property without recognition. He thought about Mark's words. The company owns all employee innovations. True. But ownership without acknowledgement? That was something else. Andrew returned to his office and compared dates. The company's expansion into hospital contracts began in 2012, the same year the Falcon patent was filed. Mark Benson joined as CFO in 2020, during the height of profitability. Julio's termination happened in 2022. The timeline suggested something ugly, a strategic removal to prevent future claims. That afternoon, Andrew called a private meeting with the legal department. He laid out the evidence, the sketches, the receipts, the testimonials, the patent with no co-author. I want to know if we have exposure, and I want to know if what happened to Julio Ramirez was legal, even if it wasn't right. The lead attorney, a woman named Susan Park, reviewed everything carefully. After an hour, she looked up. Legally, the company's on solid ground. Patents filed under corporate ownership with standard employee agreements. But ethically, she paused, this could destroy your reputation if it goes public. And morally, Mr. Sullivan, you know it's wrong. Andrew nodded slowly. What are our options? Settle privately. Compensate him. Acknowledge contribution. But you'd be setting a precedent. Maybe that's the point. That evening, Andrew made 2 decisions. First, he allocated funds from the company's internal charitable reserve, money set aside for community projects, to cover Julio's surgery. Second, he ordered a full review of all terminations Mark Benson had signed. But he didn't contact Claudia yet. He needed to do this right. Claudia was folding laundry in the Sullivan house's utility room when Andrew found her. The smell of detergent hung in the warm air, and the dryer hummed steadily behind her. Claudia, do you have a moment? She looked up, her hands stilling on a pillowcase. Of course, Mr. Sullivan. He gestured toward the kitchen. They sat across from each other at the island, the marble cool under their arms. Andrew had rehearsed this, but now the words felt clumsy. I've learned about your father, about Julio. He paused, watching her face remain carefully neutral. I've been reviewing old company records, and I've discovered some inconsistencies with his termination. I want to help with his surgery. I've set aside funds. No. The word was soft, but absolute. Andrew blinked. Claudia, this is separate from your advance request. This is about correcting. I said no, Mr. Sullivan. She stood, her posture straight, her voice steady. When I asked you for help 3 weeks ago, you told me no. You told me policies mattered more than circumstances. I respected that. I found other ways. I organized a raffle at my church. My aunt gave me her savings. I sold my mother's sewing machine, the one she brought from Mexico 30 years ago, to a pawn shop on Navigation for $300. Her eyes met his, and he saw no anger, only the unbending dignity of someone who'd learned not to depend on mercy. I don't want your guilt money. I don't want a favor that comes because you discovered my father's last name. I'll handle this with my family. She walked back to the laundry room, leaving Andrew sitting alone in the kitchen, the weight of his own policy pressing against his chest. He didn't argue. He understood. She had every right to refuse, but that didn't mean he'd stop. The next day, Andrew contacted Memorial Hermann Hospital directly. He spoke with the surgeon's office manager, explaining he was an anonymous sponsor. I want to guarantee the deposit for Julio Ramirez's valve replacement surgery. The patient and family should never know who paid. Can you arrange that? The office manager hesitated. That's unusual, sir. I understand, but it's important that this remain confidential. Just move his surgery forward. I'll wire the funds today. We'll need documentation. Send it to my attorney, Susan Park at Park & Associates. She'll handle everything. By afternoon, the deposit was confirmed. By evening, Julio's surgery was scheduled for October 27th, one day before the deadline. Claudia received the call that night while making dinner in her mother's kitchen. She listened to the hospital coordinator explain that an anonymous donor had covered the costs, her hands going still on the pot she was stirring. Who? She asked. We can't disclose that information, but your father's surgery is confirmed. After hanging up, Claudia stood at the stove, staring at the frijoles bubbling quietly, and felt something crack inside her. Not breaking, just shifting, making space for a possibility she hadn't allowed herself to consider, that maybe Andrew Sullivan was trying to do more than protect a policy. But trust, once questioned, doesn't return easily. She didn't thank him, didn't acknowledge it. She showed up to work the next day, cleaned the house, and left without a word. Andrew watched her move through his home like a careful ghost and understood. This wasn't something money could fix. It required something harder. Andrew drove to the Fifth Ward warehouse again, this time with a specific purpose. He needed to understand not just what happened, but why. Not just the business decisions, but the human cost underneath. He found another box, this one labeled Personnel, Pre-Digital. Inside were employment files from the 1990s, when his father still ran the business out of a single workshop with 12 employees. Julio Ramirez's file was thin, a single folder with a handwritten application from 1991. Under Education, GED, Houston Community College, 2 years electrical tech. Under Experience, apprentice electrician, 3 years, military service, U.S. Army honorable discharge. There was a note paper clipped to the front in his father's handwriting. Julio, good hands, sharp mind, hired. Further down, Andrew found a letter dated 1998, typed on an old typewriter. It was from Julio to Andrew's father. Mr. Sullivan, I've been thinking about the relay problems we've been having with the hospital panels. I drew up some ideas for a modular system that could be customized per facility. I know I'm just a technician, but I wanted to share in case it helps. Respectfully, Julio Ramirez. Beneath it, his father's response, handwritten on company letterhead. Julio, your ideas are excellent. Let's build a prototype. I'm authorizing materials and paying you a bonus. This could change everything for us. Keep thinking. William Sullivan. Andrew's throat tightened. His father had valued Julio, had seen him, had compensated him, even if informally. But somewhere between then and now, between the workshop and the holding company, between his father's handshake deals and modern corporate structure, Julio had been erased. Andrew kept searching. He found more receipts, more sketches, more small acknowledgments that Julio Ramirez had been more than a maintenance worker. He'd been an innovator. And then he found the patent filing from 2012, submitted by the company's first legal team. Cover letter. Enclosed patent application for Sullivan Modular Control System, Falcon. Innovation developed in-house. filing under corporate ownership per standard employment agreements. No mention of Julio. Andrew closed his eyes, feeling the decades of decisions, pragmatic, legal, profitable, that had built his company's success on a foundation of unacknowledged work. He thought about Claudia's words. "I don't want your guilt money." This wasn't about guilt. This was about truth. That afternoon, Andrew scheduled a board meeting. He called in his attorney, his head of operations, his CFO, Mark Benson, and 2 independent board members. He presented everything: the sketches, the receipts, the testimonies, the timeline. Julio Ramirez helped design the Falcon system. He was compensated informally, but never credited. His termination 2 years ago looked strategic. "I'm proposing we formally acknowledge his contribution, offer restitution, and implement new policies for inventor recognition." Mark leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Andrew, this opens a can of worms. If we acknowledge one former employee, we'll face claims from dozens. This is bad business." "It's the right thing. Right doesn't keep the company solvent. We followed the law. Employment agreements are clear. You're letting emotion cloud judgment." Andrew's voice stayed level. "The law and ethics aren't always the same thing. We built our reputation on quality and integrity. If we can't acknowledge where our innovations came from, what does that say about us?" The board argued for 2 hours. In the end, they voted to proceed with a review but stopped short of immediate action. Andrew left the meeting exhausted, but certain of one thing: he couldn't wait for consensus. He'd act alone if necessary. Julio's surgery happened on a gray October morning, the kind where Houston's humidity clung to everything like a damp towel. Claudia and her mother sat in the surgical waiting room at Memorial Hermann, surrounded by other families in various states of worry, some reading magazines with trembling hands, others praying quietly, rosary beads clicking soft rhythms. Andrew didn't come to the hospital. His presence would complicate things, raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he stayed in his office, reviewing documents and making calls, but his mind kept drifting to the surgery timeline. Incision at 8:30 a.m., valve replacement, 4 hours minimum. At noon, the surgeon called him directly. Andrew had left his number as the anonymous sponsor's emergency contact. "The procedure went well. Mr. Ramirez is stable. Recovery will take 6 to 8 weeks, but prognosis is excellent." Andrew thanked him, hung up, and sat very still in his chair, relief washing through him in unexpected waves. That evening, he received an email from Susan Park, his attorney. She'd completed the review of Mark Benson's terminations. Out of 17 dismissals, Mark had signed in 3 years. 6 showed similar patterns: long-term employees with specialized knowledge, vague performance justifications, no documentation trail. Andrew forwarded the report to the board with a single line: "We need to discuss this immediately." Meanwhile, Claudia returned to the Sullivan house 2 days after the surgery, her eyes tired but calmer. Julio was stable, out of ICU, resting in a shared recovery room with a window overlooking the medical center's parking lot. She moved through her work quietly, vacuuming, dusting, organizing, until she found Andrew in his office, staring at his computer screen. "Mr. Sullivan," he looked up. "Claudia, how is your father?" "He's recovering well. Thank you." She paused, her hands clasped in front of her. "I know it was you." The anonymous donation. The hospital administrator slipped and mentioned the sponsor had an attorney with a Houston firm. There aren't many people who do that. Andrew closed his laptop slowly. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." She stepped closer, her voice softening. "But I need to understand why. You told me no when I asked directly. Why help secretly?" "Because I was wrong." The words came easier than he expected. About the advance, about the policy, about treating exceptions like threats instead of seeing the people behind them. "I learned about your father's work here, about what he contributed, about how the company failed him. Helping with the surgery wasn't charity. It was the beginning of making things right." Claudia studied his face, searching for performance, for the polish of a guilty conscience, trying to buy forgiveness. But what she saw was simpler: regret, genuine and uncomfortable. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I fix what's broken, in the company, in how we treat people, starting with your father." He pulled out a folder, this one thick, organized, containing copies of everything he'd found. This is for you and Julio. Documentation of his contributions, testimonies from former coworkers, and a proposal for restitution, lifetime pension, retroactive royalties from Falcon panel sales, and a formal acknowledgement of his role as co-inventor. Claudia took the folder with careful hands, opening it slowly. She read the first page, a detailed timeline of Julio's innovations, and then the second, the financial calculations. Her expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to something softer. This is more than fair. It's what he earned. She looked up, and for the first time since October began, she smiled. Not fully, but enough. He'll want to meet you. I'd like that. They stood in the office, autumn light slanting through the windows, and something between them shifted. Not into friendship yet, not into trust, but into the possibility of both. Andrew met Julio 3 weeks after the surgery, on a Sunday afternoon when the hospital allowed visitors in the recovery wing. He arrived with a box of pan dulce from the panaderia on Navigation. Claudia had mentioned her father loved the conchas, and a folder containing copies of his old sketches and receipts. Julio sat propped up in bed, thinner than the photos Andrew had seen, his hair gray and sparse, but his eyes alert. When Andrew entered, Julio studied him with the careful assessment of a man who'd learned not to trust easily. Mr. Sullivan. His voice was rough from the breathing tube but steady. Mr. Ramirez, thank you for seeing me. Andrew set the pan dulce on the bedside table and pulled up a chair. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Andrew placed the folder in Julio's lap. I came to apologize for what the company did, or didn't do, for not recognizing your work, for how you were let go. None of it was right. Julio opened the folder slowly, his hands shaking slightly. Whether from surgery recovery or emotion, Andrew couldn't tell. He looked at his own sketches from 1998, at his father's handwritten notes, at the patent filing that erased his name. I never asked for credit, Julio said finally. I just wanted to solve problems, make things work better. That's what I did. And you were never acknowledged for it. Your father paid me cash bonuses. That meant something. It wasn't enough. Andrew leaned forward, his voice low and sincere. I'm proposing formal restitution, pension, royalties, co-inventor credit. It won't undo the past, but it's a start. Julio was quiet for a long time, his thumb tracing the edge of an old sketch. Why now? Because of Claudia? Partly, but also because the company was built on the work of people like you, and we forgot to say thank you. We forgot to be fair. Julio looked at him directly, and Andrew saw the same dignity in his eyes that he'd seen in Claudia's, the kind that doesn't break under pressure, just bends and holds. I kept notebooks, Julio said suddenly. Designs, ideas, things I worked on over the years. My friend Hector told me once to register them, so I did. Took them to the county clerk's office, got them time-stamped. Never thought much about it after. But they're still at home. Andrew's heart quickened. Do you still have them? In a box under my bed. Claudia knows where. Would you let me see them? Julio nodded slowly. If it helps make things right. They talked for another hour. About the old workshop. About Andrew's father. About how Houston had changed from oil town to medical center. About Julio's dreams that his daughter might have a different kind of life. One where hard work led to recognition, not just survival. When Andrew left, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not just obligation, but respect. Julio wasn't asking for revenge or demanding acknowledgement. He simply wanted fairness, the kind that should have been given decades ago. That night, Claudia brought the notebooks to Andrew's house. There were 3, spiral-bound, pages filled with technical drawings, calculations, notes in careful handwriting. Some dated back to 1995. Andrew photographed every page, sent copies to Susan Park, and began building the case not just for restitution, but for a complete overhaul of how the company treated innovation and the people behind it. The second board meeting happened in November, 2 weeks after Julio's surgery. This time, Andrew came prepared. He distributed copies of Julio's notebooks, the county clerk's registration stamps, testimonies from Hector Dominguez and Sam Park, and a financial analysis showing that acknowledging co-authorship wouldn't bankrupt the company. It would cost less than their annual executive bonus pool. Mark Benson fought back immediately. This sets a precedent we can't afford. If we acknowledge Ramirez, we're inviting lawsuits from every former employee who contributed an idea. This is emotional decision-making, not business strategy. Andrew kept his voice level. This isn't about emotion. It's about integrity. We built our reputation on quality and trust. If we can't acknowledge where our innovations came from, we lose both. I'm not asking for blind charity. I'm asking for documented truth. One of the independent board members, a retired engineer named Patricia Chen, spoke up. I've reviewed the evidence. Ramirez's contributions are clear and substantiated. The question isn't whether we owe him acknowledgement. It's whether we value our ethical standing enough to admit we were wrong. The debate lasted 3 hours. In the end, the board voted narrowly to proceed with a formal inventor recognition program, starting with Julio Ramirez. Mark Benson abstained, his face tight with anger. After the meeting, Andrew called him into his office. I'm removing you from executive operations. You'll stay on as a financial consultant, but you won't have hiring or firing authority. Mark's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake. I'm correcting one. Mark left, without another word. Over the next month, the company formalized Julio's settlement, a lifetime pension calculated on his 31 years of service, retroactive royalties from Falcon panel sales totaling $84,000, and official co-inventor status on all related patents. Additionally, Andrew established the Ramirez Innovation Fund, a scholarship program for technical staff pursuing continued education and a formal process for recognizing worker-led innovations with proper authorship. The company cut costs elsewhere, selling unused land in Galveston County, reducing executive bonuses, streamlining operations. But the balance sheet held. When Andrew presented the finalized settlement to Julio, they met at Elena's apartment in the East End. Julio sat at the small kitchen table, still recovering, but stronger, and read through the documents carefully. This is more than I expected, he said quietly. It's what you earned. Julio looked at his daughter, at his wife, at the man who'd once refused help and was now rebuilding trust through action. Gracias, Mr. Sullivan. Andrew, please. They shook hands, and Elena served coffee in mismatched mugs, and for an hour they talked not about business or policies, but about Julio's plans. Physical therapy, maybe consulting part-time, teaching at the community college where he'd earned his degree decades ago. As Andrew left, Claudia walked him to his car. The November air was cool, surprising for Houston, and the streetlights buzzed softly overhead. Thank you, she said, for everything. I should have listened to you from the start. You're listening now. They stood in the quiet street, and Andrew felt something shift between them. Not romance, not yet, but the foundation of something real. Respect earned through constancy, through promises kept, through the slow work of rebuilding what arrogance had broken. December arrived with unseasonable cold, the kind that made Houstonians dig through closets for jackets they wore twice a year. Claudia continued working at the Sullivan house, but the dynamic had changed. Andrew no longer issued instructions from behind a desk. He worked alongside her sometimes, helping carry groceries, asking about her mother's health, listening when she spoke. He also made changes. The old rules, staff using separate entrances, eating in designated areas, clocking in with precise schedules, were replaced with a written policy. All employees entitled to flexible hours, paid sick leave, and a 24-hour review process for emergency requests. It wasn't theater. It was reform. Claudia noticed. So did the other staff. The head gardener, Miguel, mentioned it one morning while trimming the hedges. Mr. Sullivan's different lately. More present. Claudia didn't respond directly, but she thought about it. People could change. Not all at once, not perfectly, but genuinely. One evening, after she'd finished organizing the library, Andrew knocked on the doorframe. Do you have a minute? They sat in the sunroom, surrounded by orchids and succulents, the last sunlight filtering through the glass. I want to ask you something, Andrew said. And please, be honest. If you're uncomfortable, just say so. Claudia waited. I'm planning a small ceremony at Houston Community College in January, a scholarship presentation for the Ramirez Innovation Fund. I'd like your father to be there, to speak if he's willing, and I'd like you to be part of it, not as an employee, but as someone who represents what this program stands for. Claudia considered. What does it stand for? Second chances, recognition, the idea that dignity doesn't depend on job titles. She nodded slowly. I'll talk to my father. There's something else. Andrew hesitated, then continued. I know my relationship with you started in the worst possible way. Me rejecting your request. You having every reason not to trust me. But over these months, I've come to respect you more than almost anyone I know. Your strength, your principles, the way you carry yourself with dignity, even when people fail you. Claudia felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression steady. Where is this going, Mr. Sullivan? Andrew, and it's going wherever you want it to go. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see you. Not as staff, not as someone I owe, but as someone I admire. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. I need time, Claudia said finally, to trust this, to trust you. Take all the time you need. They sat in the quiet sunroom as evening deepened outside, and something unspoken settled between them. Not a promise, but a possibility. The ceremony at Houston Community College took place on a Saturday in mid-January. The auditorium was small, maybe 200 seats, filled with former Sullivan Holdings employees, current staff, community college students, and a few reporters from the Houston Chronicle covering the story. Julio sat in the front row, dressed in a borrowed suit jacket, his hair combed carefully. Elena sat beside him, holding his hand. Claudia stood near the side entrance, watching her father's profile, the way his jaw tightened when he was nervous, the way his hands fidgeted in his lap. Andrew took the podium and spoke briefly. No corporate jargon, no self-congratulation, just truth. 30 years ago, a man named Julio Ramirez joined Sullivan Electrical Works as a maintenance technician. Over 3 decades, he helped transform a workshop into a company serving hospitals across Texas. He designed systems that saved lives by keeping power reliable. And for too long, we failed to recognize that. Today, we're correcting that mistake. Not because we have to, but because it's right. He called Julio to the stage. The applause was genuine, not polite. People standing, some wiping their eyes. Julio spoke for 5 minutes, his voice quiet but steady. He talked about hard work, about believing in second chances, about the importance of young people learning that their ideas matter. When he finished, Andrew presented the first Ramirez Innovation Scholarship to a 22-year-old electrical engineering student named Maria, whose essay about designing affordable power systems for rural clinics had moved the selection committee to tears. After the ceremony, people lingered, shaking Julio's hand, thanking Andrew, asking questions about the scholarship. Claudia stood off to the side, watching her father smile for the first time in months with genuine ease. Andrew found her near the exit. Your father did well. He always does when people listen. They walked out together into the January afternoon, and Andrew asked, Can I take you to dinner? Not because I'm your employer, just because I'd like to. Claudia stopped, studying his face. Weeks of observation had taught her to recognize sincerity. Where? Anywhere you choose. There's a taqueria on Canal Street. My Tia's friend owns it. Best barbacoa in Houston. Andrew smiled. Lead the way. They took separate cars, her old Honda, his Mercedes, and met at the small restaurant with plastic tables and a neon sign that flickered. They ordered at the counter, sat by the window, and talked. Not about work, not about policies, about Houston, about music, about childhood memories and future plans. Somewhere between the second taco and the third, the boundary between employer and employee dissolved completely, replaced by 2 people learning each other's rhythms, pauses, jokes, silences that felt comfortable instead of tense. When they left, the sky was bruised purple with dusk. Andrew walked Claudia to her car, and before she opened the door, she said, Thank you. For today. For all of it. Thank you for giving me a second chance I didn't deserve. Everyone deserves a second chance, if they're willing to do the work. She got in her car, and as Andrew watched her drive away, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope, unguarded and real. Spring came to Houston slowly, the city softening from winter's brief chill into the humid warmth that would build towards summer. By March, Julio had returned to work part-time at Sullivan Holdings, not in maintenance, but as a technical consultant, reviewing new designs and mentoring younger staff. Claudia, after weeks of careful consideration, accepted a new position, household manager, with a contract that included salary, benefits, and the explicit right to refuse any task she deemed inappropriate. Andrew insisted. She negotiated. They agreed. But more than the job changed. Their relationship evolved quietly, built on dinners at taquerias and walks along Buffalo Bayou, and conversations that lasted past midnight. Andrew met Elena, who fed him tamales and interrogated him gently about his intentions. Claudia met Andrew's mother, who initially bristled at the idea of her son dating the help, but softened after seeing them together. The way Andrew listened when Claudia spoke, the way Claudia challenged him when he slipped into old assumptions. They didn't rush. Love, real love, isn't built on grand gestures. It's built on constancy, showing up, listening, choosing each other daily, even when it's inconvenient. By summer, their relationship became public. Not announced with press releases, just lived openly. They attended the community college's summer scholarship event together, sat side by side in Elena's living room during Sunday dinners, walked through the farmer's market where Tia Carmen sold tamales, and introduced them to everyone as La Pareja. Some of Andrew's former social circle whispered, the maid taking advantage, the millionaire making a fool of himself. But the whispers faded when facts prevailed. Julio's settlement was documented, legal, earned. Claudia's position was professional, contracted, chosen. Their relationship was built on respect, not rescue. One evening in July, they stood on the rooftop terrace of Andrew's River Oaks home, watching the city lights glitter against the dark sky. The air smelled like jasmine from the neighbor's garden and faintly of rain that hadn't fallen yet. "Do you ever regret it?" Claudia asked. "Changing everything, losing friends, fighting the board." Andrew considered. "I regret the years I didn't question things, the policies I hid behind, the way I confused protecting the company with protecting my comfort." He looked at her, his expression open. "But do I regret this? Us? No. Never." Claudia leaned against the railing, her profile lit by soft amber light from the house. "My father says you're a good man. Coming from him, that means something. I'm trying to be. That's all anyone can do." They stayed on the roof as the night deepened, talking about plans. Elena's bakery opening next month in the East End. Julio's idea to teach evening classes at the community college. Andrew's proposal to expand the scholarship fund beyond Houston into rural Texas. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. Inequality didn't disappear because one wealthy man learned to listen. Systemic problems don't vanish with individual kindness. But here, between these two people, one who'd learned humility, one who'd never lost dignity, a bridge existed where once there was only a wall, and it began with a single word: no. A refusal that turned through truth and the slow work of restitution into something lasting. Yes to fairness, yes to recognition, yes to love built not on rescue but on respect, yes to second chances earned through constancy. They stood together under the Houston sky, two people who'd found each other across a divide of class and assumption and chose, daily, deliberately, to keep building the bridge between them. Because in the end, that's what matters. Not where you start, but whether you're willing to do the work to make things right. And Andrew Sullivan, who once believed policies mattered more than people, had learned the hardest lesson: that truth, faced head-on and acted upon with integrity, could rebuild both a company and a heart. The city hummed below them, full of stories like theirs, struggles and grace, failures and second chances, people learning to see each other as fully human. And somewhere in the East, and in a small apartment with worn furniture and family photos on every wall, Julio Ramirez sat with his wife, looking at his daughter's smile in a recent photograph, and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Not for money, not for settlements, but for the simple, profound gift of being seen.